True scary paranormal activity stories. Redditor 101, our previous house was an old house. The former owner died there, our neighbors told us this. I used to feel a presence in the front entry, saw a slight shadow moving across out of the corner of my eye. And I would often find the light on in the front bedroom when I knew I'd turned it off. It never felt malignant or threatening though. Redditor 102, no one may believe this, but I ended up living in a house we later discovered had previously been rented by two young girls whose father had drowned them and they died. Besides the footsteps, which were commonplace and easily explained away, here are some of the things we experienced. One beloved childhood dog disappeared for about an hour one day when no one left or came in. We hear scratching at the door and find our dog outside warm and not wet despite the snowstorm. 2 One night, my best friend and I wake up. Our bedroom door is opening, leading into the hall. The only other bedroom is directly across from the bathroom. We watch the bathroom door open by itself, close, the light come on, listen to the sink turn on, watch the door open, the light turn off, the door close, listen to footsteps lead away. This happens 2 more times before my friend jumps up and closes the door. 3 When we move out, my mom's ex-boyfriend calls to explain how he heard a bang and my deceased father's organ had collapsed in the basement. All my Barbies were strewn across the basement floor from their usual spot. 4 Later, the piece that made us put everything together, my mom revealed to me years later that my nephew exited my room and said I don't want to play with the 2 little girls in Aunt Megan's room anymore. Redditor 103, no one ever believes me. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I awoke from a dead sleep to a man's voice calling my name. Name, come downstairs. Come downstairs and give me a hug and a kiss goodbye. Child me, assuming it was my father, ran down the stairs to say goodbye to my dad. I looked into the pitch blackness and saw a figure, but it was too big to be my dad. I bolted in the opposite direction crying and ran to my parents' room. My mom was sleeping alone in bed and I asked where my dad had gone. She said he's at work, he started working nights, remember? I was shaken to my core. This memory is extremely vivid and is part of the reason I am a little scared of the dark to this day. Redditor 104, I only have one instance that happened many years ago when I was in the 7th grade. So growing up, my grandma lived right across from my parents' house. From our living room window, we could see the back of her house and part of her barn where she always stored firewood in the winter. She passed away from cancer the winter of my 7th grade year. A couple months later, on day when it was still cold, I got off the school bus and hopped on the computer in the living room. It's right by the window that overlooks her property. My parents both worked until 5 or 6, so I was alone and had a couple of hours to play computer games. Our phone was also by the computer, and I remember one of my best friends at the time calling me to chat about whatever went on in school that day. As I'm sitting on the computer and talking with my friend, I happen to glance out the window as I usually do. As I'm looking, I see an elderly figure with white hair and a green jacket heading towards her house from the barn. I froze. It looked just like her. She always wore that green jacket in the winters when she would go and get wood before she got sick. I interrupted my friend telling her what I had just witnessed and she encouraged me to go investigate. So I immediately get my coat on and start walking over there in case my eyes played tricks on me and it was someone else. I remember taking the landline phone with me so that I could still talk with my friend, but it obviously ended up disconnecting as I crossed into her yard. But I should also mention that we live in a very rural area, so chances are that it was someone else was very small. I would have been able to see or hear any vehicles driving to or away from her house, and there were no other neighbors or houses nearby, besides my aunt and uncle's house, but they're both at work still and they don't have white hair. So I get to the front steps of her porch about a minute later and look around her house and property. No vehicles or any sign that anyone was there. I suddenly get really scared because it dawns on me I could have seen her ghost. The thing is, I've always been a skeptical person when it comes to ghosts and things, but that's one thing I couldn't explain. I remember telling my parents and my aunt and uncle about it and they were surprised as well. I'd like to think that I saw her. Redditor 105, this happened to me about 20 years ago when I was about 20 years old. I had been staying over at my BF's now ex house. He had to work for a few hours the next morning and I stayed in his bed sleeping. It was probably 10 a.m. and I was still asleep and I heard and felt someone whisper baby in my ear. It woke me up immediately. I looked around the room but I was alone and the bedroom door was still shut. I was definitely freaked out. I told my BF about it later and he said I was probably just dreaming. I then reiterated that I felt the breath of someone whispering in my ear, too. He brushed it off. Fast forward about a year. I'm in the living room watching TV, my BF is in that very same bedroom in bed sleeping. It's after midnight and my BF suddenly opened the bedroom door with wide eyes. He asks, "Were you just in the room?" "No." "Why?" He says, "I just had someone whisper baby in my ear while I was sleeping." I asked him if he felt it too. He confirmed he did. I looked at him and said, "I told you it wasn't a dream. I never felt like the spirit or whatever was evil or mean or anything. Never had anything else happen in the apartment while I lived there. But it was definitely an experience I will never forget." I can't imagine he did either, but I can't confirm that. Edit, spelling. Redditor 106, right after high school a friend and I went to visit a local cemetery. I'm not sure how old it is, but I believe it's from the late 1800s, early 1900s. This specific graveyard has some fun local urban legends about shadow people being seen walking around and sometimes leaving the cemetery grounds late at night, even a story or two about nearby houses being visited by a shadow person. We wandered around a bit. We were always as respectful of where we were as possible when we'd visit anywhere. Towards the back there was a small forest area with some pretty thick brush blocking it, but there was a super narrow pathway leading to what looked like at least one old grave marker, completely eroded by weather and illegible. Thought it was really neat, tried to say something nice to any invisible residents we bothered and got on our way. A couple days later I went over to hang with my friend and they met me at the end of their drive where I always parked. I hopped out, we hugged, and they had the biggest shit-eating grin on. "So, guess what I have?" They set a piece of stone on the ground and it definitely took me a second before it dawned on me it was a piece of the eroded grave marker from a few nights prior. It gets weird here. There definitely could be any number of explanations and coincidences responsible for it, but here goes. Their parents let their dog Charlie out of the front door and the dog beelined to the piece of stone on the ground. That's all that was there. Relatively new asphalt driveway and a piece of whitewashed, sun-bleached stone. The dog hated it. Nipping, pawing, growling, barking, pouncing, you name it. After a couple seconds of this, the temperature noticeably dropped and I wish I was making it up, but it started to get hazy out, if not almost foggy. I instructed my friend that we would be taking this back immediately and we chatted a bit. I reiterated, we hugged and I headed home to my parents' house. Nothing else odd happened until I went to sleep. 3:25 a.m. specifically, I was woken up. I had my bed set up so the head end was inside a closeted area with the feet sticking out. My alarm clock next to me essentially inside the closet. I couldn't move anything. I could look around with my eyes but I could not move. Nor could I utter any type of sound, save for an exasperated gasping sound. Without warning, in front of my face a very old woman came into view. I could make out her entire head to her shoulders. She was old, maybe 70s, and not ugly, not beautiful but fair. She had gray hair that was flowing around about a little longer than shoulder length. She was mouthing words but I couldn't hear a thing. I could tell she was talking to me. There was what felt like eye contact being made when I wasn't glancing around frantically. This lasted for 3 minutes. It felt like my entire life. It felt like eternity. I had enough time to from being terrified to thinking I need to snap out of this. I was persistently trying to move my hand or arm and eventually was able to wiggle my finger, and abruptly was able to lift an arm. I grabbed a hatchet I kept by my bed. Yes. A hatchet. So cool. Much badass. Right? Shot straight up, leapt out of bed and ran to the living room, turned the lights on and sat on the couch watching TV until the sun was up. After this things are uneventful. We returned the stone. Nothing ever happened again. I've never had anything even remotely close to this happen. I'm a terrible sleeper, but not in this way. Anyway, TL, Dr. Friend stole gravestone? I had sleep paralysis maybe related to it. Nothing ever happened after returning the stone. Redditor 107, while I went to the University of Idaho, some weekends I would spend at my uncle's house in our extended family's hometown. There were a number of times in which a shadowy mass could be seen in the guest room. During these times, it became particularly cold. It wasn't logical, so I told other family members and, lo and behold, they experienced something similar. There was one night that I felt that presence, leading me to reassure myself by saying aloud, "There's nothing there, is there?" A gaspy whisper replied, "Yes." Another time when I felt that chill, I said, "I don't fear you, because I invoke the name of Jesus." Again, there was that voice that said, "Jesus isn't here." The most terrifying thing I experienced, however, was when I was lying in bed and I happened to look toward the doorway. Standing there was a late middle-aged man with gray hair, a great beard, dressed in a plaid shirt and overalls. Holding the doorknob, he stared at me with his head raised at an angle and grinning with tight lips. I shouted bloody murder, for I had never been so frightened in my entire life. I have had many hypnagogic hallucinations, but this felt very different, completely tangible. Redditor 108, I have recently had a paranormal experience that links back to my childhood. Bear with me while I provide some context. Growing up, I lived in a relatively rural town with a small community, you know, the type where everyone knows everyone and all the kids of a similar age hang out together. The town itself is dead set in a valley, so there are several large rocky hills bordering the north, east and west. To the south there was a great expanse of woodland. Cutting through the middle of this wood was the only direct road in and out of the town. Naturally, the majority of our youth was spent hiking the hills and exploring the woods. One summer when I was around 13, myself and a few friends decided to hike up the North Hill and watch the sunset. Just before the sun set to the west, we noticed smoke rising from the woods. At first we thought it was a forest fire, but this smoke had a purple hue to it and seemed to be billowing steady and in one particular area. Of course, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to go and explore the source and tried to map where it was coming from as best as a bunch of 13-year-olds could. The walk down took roughly 1.5 hours to complete, so by the time we stopped for torches and a snack, the woods were pitch black and the smoke had faded. Fear trumping curiosity, we decided to leave it until morning. The next day we set off to find the purple smoke source. I remember there being a thick fog in the woods that morning and a palpable chill in the air. As we were relatively comfortable and had a level of familiarity with the area, we spent an hour following the road before deciding to cut left through the thick dense brush. At this stage my friends and I were deeper in the woods than any of us had ever been and cared to admit, so we had no real idea where we were going. That's when we found it. In a clearing surrounding by trees stood a small stone cottage with a thatched roof and, I shit you not, purple smoke billowing from the chimney. As we all just stood there in silence, not really knowing what to do, the most terrifying thing I have experienced occurred. From the side of the cottage something rounded the corner. At first glance it looked like a person in a hooded robe. I later described it as a black, robed, faceless, medieval monk. Honestly, the only way I can describe it is as unnatural. I don't quite understand how I felt looking at it, but it just didn't seem human. I mean, we couldn't see a face as it was shrouded by the hood. We all ran back a few paces and then stopped to look back at whatever this was. It was just standing there watching. It raised an arm and that's when we all noped out of there. Honestly, I think we all gave Usain Bolt a run for his money that day. Made it back to the road, told our parents. It was reported to local authorities, and they checked it out in case it was a crazy homeless person. Nothing ever materialized, no cottage, no nothing. We never went back into that side of the woods again. For a while, even driving out of town through the trees filled me with dread, so I was relieved when we moved several years later. Anyway, skip forward 20 odd years when I moved back to the area as a parent myself. Town has been massively redeveloped, there's more homes, shops, and the woods have been heavily decimated. All that remains is a section of woodland that serves as a walkway, which is mostly used by joggers and people to walk their dogs. At the end of October 2021, after 5 years living here, I was out for my usual morning run on the walkway when I feel this weird sense of déjà vu. I stop to take a minute and through the trees, and I swear I see a clearing. At that moment everything came back to me, but I brush it off and run on. Next day, usual morning run, I get the same sense of deja vu as the day before, but I don't even stop this time. As I'm leaving the gated exit, I stop and look back and see purple smoke rising in the distance from the treetops. I haven't been back to the walkway and haven't experienced anything since. Part of me thinks this latest experience is some weird fever dream or hallucination, but I know deep down it's not. As of this April, the walkway is being cleared to make room for more housing developments. Part of me is relieved, another is slightly tempted to go for one last exploration. The other logical side feels bad for potential homebuyers that acquire that site. I wonder, will they have any paranormal experience? Redditor 109, I live alone in the country, and one winter after a decent snow I was letting my dog out and noticed some human footprints in the snow. It had to be a pretty big dude because they were about size 13 boots. They came out of the woods right up to my house and went west. I followed them but never found a beginning or an end. The guy must have walked miles, and it was freezing. Sometimes my barn door will be open in the mornings, it shuts tightly and there is no chance it is wind blowing it open, and I wonder if it's that guy. I never bother to lock it because the only thing worth stealing would be the tractor, and it's loud enough I would wake up, and I figure if someone really needs a place to sleep, that bad whatever, as long as I don't run into them. Redditor 110, I felt a cool breeze on the back of my neck multiple times while sitting in a rocking chair in my kids' room putting them to bed. Room was warm, not a drafty room. No fans or furnace were running. Scared the shot out of me. Redditor 111, I went to visit a friend of my boyfriend's in rural Texas. It was my first time meeting him myself, and we stayed the night at his house for a birthday get-together. He introduced himself and his house, because he knew it was haunted and wanted us to be aware of it before we slept the night, as unusual things happen at night or when you're alone in the house. His house had been bought from his family. His family had moved elsewhere. His grandpas and grandmas of multiple generations were apparently known ghosts in the house and would appear when they chose to, and choose their appearance. The house was separated into the new section and the old section, the new section being a giant living room, washroom, and bedroom added onto the kitchen and dining room of the existing house. He had us stay in the living room on a futon in the new part of the house so that the ghosts wouldn't bother us when we were sleeping, as they wouldn't bother you in the new section, only the older part of the house. He could sense I was skeptical, so he showed me his attic during the evening hours, when it was daylight still. There were burn marks on majority of the beams of the attic, handprints, that were the oddest thing I had ever seen in person, as they were not simply soot marks from someone playing a joke or fabricating a ghost story like I was drawing a conclusion towards. These marks were indented into the wood where palms and the fatty parts of hands would leave a contour upon touching the surface. Every single handprint was a contoured handprint into the wood. I looked at him kinda like, yeah, okay buddy, well let's get out of here. He told us about his ex seeing a ghost demon appearing on their dresser, squatting and staring at her in the middle of the night when they started falling apart as a couple. She and him were fighting a lot, and she was apparently in the wrong in her behaviors, so he explained that his ghosts were making her feel unwelcome so she would leave. Their bedroom was in the older part of the house. I didn't see anything abnormal happen while I was there, so I brushed it off as a joke. This man joked about everything. I spent some time cleaning his house since he was a bachelor and had an entire living room full of mail and things to throw away like pizza boxes. I was stuck there in his company, and couldn't stand the mess. I also reluctantly agreed to take home his puppy his ex left behind, that was just a reminder of her to him. I believe these behaviors, things I did, gave me favor with the ghosts. In hindsight, I was and never have been a believer in the supernatural, and I stayed by my convictions until I spent the night a second time, a few months later. Me and my then boyfriend spent the night again, but there were more people sleeping over the second time, so we slept in a room in the older part of the house. Again, he warned me, teased that the house was haunted, and I just shrugged it off. Preface: I am an extremely heavy sleeper. Once I fall asleep, it takes more than gunfire or thunder and rain to wake me up. I sleep like a bear. I don't fall asleep easily, either. Once I get woken up, it takes a lot to go back to sleep, usually an hour of reading or so. I woke up with a start in the middle of the night. Someone who was not my boyfriend was sitting on the corner of the bed. It had indented upon their weight resting there. I sat straight up in the middle of the bed, immediately alert because there was no one there. I could feel the bed move like someone lifted their weight off of the corner, and all of a sudden I felt an overwhelming aura of peace overcome me, pushed me back to the bed, and I promptly fell asleep. I met said friend in the kitchen in the morning and told him what happened, and he just smiled and said it was his family saying hello. I have never been more awestruck and grateful that nothing bad happened to me in that house. I never returned to his house after that, but I surely will never doubt paranormal oddities ever again. Redditor 112, when my mom was dying she was in the ICU and she arrested and they brought her back but it was too late. Her heart was beating but there was no brain activity. They ran several scans over the course of a week or thereabouts and there was just nothing. So I had the conversation with the doctor and he took her off life support. She lingered for another week or so. I had come home from university when she went in the ICU. I was 18 because we were each other's only family and I had to get back or lose my scholarship. I knew she wouldn't want that, so I made the heart-wrenching decision to not wait any longer for her to die and go back. I went in to say goodbye, and she wasn't in there. I held her hand and I just couldn't feel her in her body. There was no presence. But then I felt her, but on the other side of the room. And I felt this love from her, and then she was gone. So while I still felt kinda bad that I was leaving, I felt also like, well, she's gone, there's nothing left for me here. Her heart stopped a couple days later, but she was already long gone. Redditor 113, I feel like everyone has had some kind of situation like this, but one time when I was in 7th grade I was homesick with the flu. I was downstairs in my basement playing Minecraft with one of my friends and I heard heavy footsteps the floor above me, and assuming it was my mom I holler up to see if it's her and the footsteps just stop. Right after I call for her. No answer. I assume I'm just hearing things, and then I hear more footsteps and I call up again just assuming I was wrong and she just didn't hear me and they stop again. I go upstairs kind of nervous and check my kitchen to see if she's in there. All of my cabinet doors are open. As I walk in to close the doors I almost pass out and have to sit down to collect myself. Confused on what's going on, I just close the doors and go lay down back in my basement. A couple hours later my mom comes home from work and I ask her if she came home on break and she didn't. Very confusing. Later finding out our house was located where medic tents were in the Battle of Manassas. For those who don't know, that's the battle which led the Union and Confederates to the Civil War. My mom, younger brother, and sister had all experienced activity similar or hearing voices in rooms while no one is in them. Redditor 114, when I was about 11, I visited my stepdad's parents' house one day to hang out with them and play video games with my cousins who lived next door. I was supposed to stay for the whole weekend, but that night when I slept in my step-aunt's old room, I abruptly woke up sweating and my heart racing. I was under a blanket, so I began to feel very hot, and as I moved to pull it down from my head to get some air, I heard creaking from the wooden floors coming from across the room. I heard it slowly get closer and closer to me. I immediately freeze up and my breaths got heavy. I then felt what I can describe as something hovering or leaning over me as I laid at the edge of the bed with my body turned facing the wall. I vividly remember feeling a presence so close to my face that I swear I could feel breaths that weren't mine through the blanket. I think I might have passed out or something because I can't recall how I ended up falling asleep. In the morning, I called my mom to come pick me up and I never stayed in that room again nor spoke about it for a while because I genuinely didn't like the feeling of having to talk about it. A few years ago, I finally mentioned that night to my stepdad and mom while eating dinner at our house because we were talking about how my step-aunt's room was going to be turned into a football memorabilia room for my step-grandpa. My stepdad told me that as a kid he experienced lots of creepy stuff at that house. He said he never told me about it because I was just a kid and he didn't want to scare me for no reason. Redditor 115, it may be simple but it scared the shit out of me. I was home alone, it was dark and the rain starts to pour. I went up the stairs to close some windows. The stairs is parallel to almost a 2-foot mirror, so obviously you can see something on your peripheral when you walk past through it. When I went back downstairs I walk in front of the mirror, there was an uncanny figure sitting on the stairs almost taking up 3 steps on the reflection. In reflex, I ran right to my room and didn't come out until my parents got home. Redditor 116, warning sign, this is going to be a novel, warning sign, I was a younger adult when I was working as a custodian, at my local, university well, they have this ancient, existing before dinosaurs, older than time, building known as Med Site 2. It's a triangular shaped, brown and black striped building that was built with all of the old school materials that we don't typically use anymore in more modern day buildings. This behemoth of a building has 7 floors, and because the building is so big. Redditor 116, warning sign, this is going to be a novel, warning sign, I was a younger adult when I was working as a custodian, at my local, university well, they have this ancient, existing before dinosaurs, older than time, building known as Med Site 2. It's a triangular shaped, brown and black striped building that was built with all of the old school materials that we don't typically use anymore in more modern day buildings. This behemoth of a building has 7 floors, and because the building is so big. Redditor 116, warning sign, this is going to be a novel, warning sign, I was a younger adult when I was working as a custodian, at my local, university well, they have this ancient, existing before dinosaurs, older than time, building known as Med Site 2. It's a triangular shaped, brown and black striped building that was built with all of the old school materials that we don't typically use anymore in more modern day buildings. This behemoth of a building has 7 floors, and because the building is so big, if a custodian got hurt or injured. Redditor 116, warning sign, this is going to be a novel, warning sign, I was a younger adult when I was working as a custodian, at my local, university well, they have this ancient, existing before dinosaurs, older than time, building known as Med Site 2. It's a triangular shaped, brown and black striped building that was built with all of the old school materials that we don't typically use anymore in more modern day buildings. This behemoth of a building has 7 floors, and because the building is so big, if a custodian got hurt or injured. Redditor 116, warning sign, this is going to be a novel, warning sign, I was a younger adult when I was working as a custodian, at my local, university well, they have this ancient, existing before dinosaurs, older than time, building known as Med Site 2. It's a triangular shaped, brown and black striped building that was built with all of the old school materials that we don't typically use anymore in more modern day buildings. This behemoth of a building has 7 floors, and because the building is so big, if a custodian got hurt or injured, no one would notice until the end of your shift, literally each floor. Due to how staffing was done, I worked with 3 other custodians, one of them being a jokester on floors 2, 4, and 6. One literally was forbidden from calling off, as that individual would face reprimanding no matter what paperwork one brought in to justify not showing up to work anyway. My partner was the go-to guy when it came to getting equipment fixed, so there were a lot of times I had to be by myself because the other 2 custodians I shared floors with were cleaning on their end. One night I was vacuuming an office and listening to my audiobook. Mind you, I had keys to all of the offices to my assigned floors, and I always left my doors unlocked until towards the end of my shift so that I knew to lock them all in one go. Well, someone or something slammed my office door shut. I stopped listening to my audiobook and turned around. My goofy ass went to go investigate, and somehow my office door was magically locked. At the end of my shift, I went over towards my coworker thinking it was him pranking me, as he liked to lighten the mood in our workplace by occasionally having some fun. I went over to him and said, "That's a good one." He looked at me, confused, and said, "What are you talking about, NRRW 1996? I responded, "That wasn't you that locked me out of my office a few hours ago?" His response, "I was helping the general manager put away stock all night and my teammate was helping on another floor." I was not only shocked but horrified. I do believe in spirits, and that's how I learned to vacuum clean while waking backwards and to scan my entire surroundings. A few days later, it was my turn to clean the oversized lab on floor 4. Again, my partner is now fixing the floor machine down on floor 2. The jokester got assigned to an additional floor because we had a custodian call off in this particular department. They only have so many custodians assigned to these buildings. There I am moping the oversized lab, looking like a scene out of a horror film. It's dark in there, dingy, science equipment everywhere. I know damn well that I'm the only one in there. Heck, the only one that's on that side of the building, when I hear my name get called inside the lab that I'm cleaning. I stopped mopping and stood there. I heard some weird SS noise again, and this time I ran out of the lab. Over the course of 3 months I've been locked out of offices, doors be unlocked when I know damn well that I did lock them, cleaning supplies come up missing when I know where I last sat them, get attacked by oversized, man-eating roaches, and experienced a bunch of their weird stuff. I stayed 3 months before transferring to a different, non-haunted building. This time it was the dental school, but my experience there paled into comparison to that haunted-ass med-sci too. Redditor 117, so this happened to me and my GF. Both occurrences happened in my bed. It was afternoon for me a year ago or so, and I was taking a nap. I sort of woke up but wasn't fully awake. I got more and more awake but couldn't totally move. I started to feel pressure on my bed. It felt exactly like cat hopping on one side of me to the next. Then it was on my chest. I felt the pressure on me. The weirdest part was the feeling of fur on my face. Like a cat put its belly on my face. I was able to move after that just fine. Probably sleep paralysis. Then my current GF experienced the same thing, like a cat walking on the bed and sitting next to her. My favorite cat I've ever had died in the house I'm in currently. I miss him so much. Redditor 118, used to work security at a pretty well-known amusement park, with a history of death, and a factory that exploded a lot nearby. One night as I'm driving down the road I see a person run from the side and jump out in front of me. I swerve, and when I stop there is nothing there. A coworker also said he saw a little girl on a walkway as he was driving and couldn't stop. He swore he hit someone, but there was no one, and no marks in the snow. Redditor 119, one night my boyfriend and I were sleeping and woke up to a sound of the key in my bedroom lock jiggling. It's one of those older locks where the keyhole is bigger than the key. I lock my room when I go to sleep because I kept waking up to doors wide open, and I don't like that. I went straight back to sleep because I thought I'm dreaming. A whole month later BF admits it really happened. This happened at least 5 more times. The doorknob would jiggle and then the key in the lock. One night I slammed on the door and heard 3 steps on the stairs and then front door open and shut in less than 5 seconds. This would be impossible to do. My mom was downstairs in the living room, didn't hear or see anything. The front door was locked with the lay turn twice. My brother had that happen to him too a few weeks ago. This would always happen after 1 a.m. when everyone would be asleep. My mom falls asleep in front of the TV, so that's why she was in the living room. Redditor 120, I was off-roading with a lot of people. We had a club gathering from all the country. We had like 30 cars. I was the 3rd car. A random guy was in the middle of the road where people don't usually go because the road is a mess. He got out of the way, behind the only tree there was, and once we passed that tree he disappeared. The tree was way thinner than him. He turned into atoms. I had to ask via radio if anyone else saw that. 5 other cars responded affirmative. Till this day we still talk about what we just witnessed. Redditor 121, I'm just going to randomly list off stuff that has happened to me throughout my life. No order and minimal elaboration. Entity held me above my bed when I was a child. Lady ghost molested me and followed me to 2 other houses after we moved. Used to hear unintelligible arguing in my head at one house. Never happened before or after that house. Toys used to go missing for days, weeks at a time, then show up in places I didn't have them, nor were they in a place I would have put them. Got a new dog. He refused to come in the house for several days. First night in, he freaked out in my room. My TV turned on at the time. I thought he did it because he was sniffing around it. Then he started growling and barking at me and chomping it above my face. I shot up out of bed and freaked out, but only because I thought our new dog was crazy. This is one of the houses related to some of the other stuff, and I later came to the conclusion that the weird stuff that happened there was paranormal. Been woken up randomly throughout life by some sort of noise, only to see a red light washing over the ceiling, and only the ceiling. Basically the ceiling is entirely red. It's obviously a light, but it's not coming from anywhere or anything I can see. Used to think that it might be auditory and visual hallucinations due to maybe being semi-asleep, but then it started sticking around after being fully awake and would disappear when I would go to get up and investigate. I have no history of any sort of hallucinations. Unless you see the arguing I heard in my head for a very short period of time in that one house, but I don't was stuck up a tall ass tree when I was a kid. Had a friend go to get help. I lost my grip strength and fell out. I closed my eyes because I thought I was falling to my death. I could see an angel, not the biblically accurate one, carrying me to ground and letting me down. When I opened my eyes I was safe on the ground with no angel in sight. I have other experiences that I guess are less paranormal and more cryptozoological and UFO related. LPT, don't tell people you had sexual experiences with a ghost, and definitely don't phrase it as you got a ghost job. Redditor 122, oh yes. So my family has a shore house that's been a part of my family since 1883. Everyone of my family has stayed in that house. A ex-great-uncle died in one of the rooms that I slept in because it was downstairs. I was too afraid to sleep in the upstairs when I stayed there alone, so according to a medium, or whatever they're called, told us it was haunted by my ex-great-aunt Beth. I also believe her husband is haunting because of my dad's stories anyway. My parents told me stories from back in the day of their own experiences with unexplainable stories. I thought they were made up stories to scare me. Well, one time me and my buddy were in my living room and I was sitting in a chair that sat next to the door frame that was next to the staircase. It's just me and him in the house. When we hear footsteps going up the staircase, we stood up and went to the stairs, and we listened as we heard step by step go up the stairs. It was during the day, so it wasn't as scary. Another time in the same house, after assuming the person who haunts the house was my great-aunt Beth, I would jokingly talk to the ghost in the house. I wasn't sure if she actually heard me. Well, in my kitchen we have two long fluorescent light bulbs, one long one and then another one next to it. Well, one didn't work all summer, like literally never turned on. Well, after the last day in the house I was locking the house up for the season. I'm in the kitchen and I jokingly say, "Okay, Aunt Beth, I'm leaving. Have a good night. Love you." The light bulb that didn't turn on all of summer suddenly turns on. Lol, I was so terrified I grabbed my stuff, shut the lights off and bounced. The last experience was once again in the same house, so even though I was afraid to stay in the upstairs at night, the only rooms with AC were the upstairs. So in the bedroom, there's a wooden folding door that connects to another bedroom that you have to jam shut because it keeps the cold air in. And then there's the main bedroom door that goes into the main hallway. That door you also have to jam shut because cold air, and the door is expanded from the humidity, so you gotta jam it into the frame anyway. One morning I wake up and my bedroom door is wide open and the door across the bedroom is open and the lamp in on the floor. All the doors and windows are locked. I try not to think anything of it, but it freaks me out. So the following night, I have the doors closed. I'm scared, but I fall asleep. I wake up the next morning and now the sliding door is open, my bedroom door is open and the door across the hallway is open and the lamp is now shattered on the floor. It was so terrifying, but thank God I didn't witness it or wake up to it. Redditor 123, saw and heard loads of things in one of the houses we lived in when I was 16-18. The friendliest were these little shadows. They reached from the size of a small bird to the size of a miniature pincher. Everyone in the house saw these things. They didn't have a distinct shape, more like smoky blobs. They weren't very fast either. Usually you'd see it out of the corner of your eye, and when you'd look they'd be gone. Walking through the hall. Walking past doorways. Crawling down the corner in a room. Once late at night one floated past the TV while I was watching infomercials and doing homework. They didn't seem smart or even to notice us, just like they were existing. When I was 17-18 the footsteps on the roof started. Many nights between 2-3 my cat would stop and stare at the ceiling. I always had a Rain and Thunder White Noise CD playing on repeat, so the footsteps were loud. They'd start at my closet and go across to my window. Sometimes it sounded like someone slid down the side of the house and jumped down. I was always too afraid to look. My window looked out into the street. My dad heard the footsteps some nights too. He's even hear a thump as someone landed on the backyard deck. His room has a sliding glass door that went straight to the backyard. He'd go out to look and nobody would be there. Eventually we sent my brothers up on the roof as an experiment. One was a thin 5 feet 5 inches and the other a very chubby 6 feet 1 inch. They stomped and jumped and we could barely hear them. There was an attic space, but it wasn't tall enough to stand up in. Over my room it was only like 6 inches. The only entrance was in my dad's closet. At night sometimes I'd hear cupboards slamming in the kitchen. The front door open and close. Dishes clanging. Right up until I turned the corner where I could see into the kitchen down the hallway. The light would be on but nobody was in there. The door would be locked. All the other bedrooms would be dark and quiet. Redditor 124. This isn't my story, rather my mother's, but she tells me it about every year when my aunt is brought up. So about 25 years ago, my mom and her sister, my aunt, were saying their daily goodbyes to go off to school. Usually, they would just tell each other bye, I love you, right before school, but something was different today. My mom felt compelled to say something different. This time, she said drive safe, bye, I love you. She didn't know why she felt the need to say that, but anyways. My aunt is driving about 20-30 minutes later, and out of nowhere, boom, another car hits her car head on, almost instantly killing my aunt. Her body was absolutely mutilated and her arm was basically separated from her whole body. It was very tragic. She had so many good friends and the entire family loved her dearly. A week later, my grandpa, my mom's dad, told her to keep her promise. Confused on what that meant, he told her that he had a dream about my aunt. She said to tell my mom to keep her promise. Her promise being to stop smoking. Fast forward about 3 months, my mom's dad is out at the casino, not home with my mom. My mom was in the shower and had just gotten out, causing the mirror to be all fogged up. When she got out, she looked at the mirror very closely. She turned her head in all ways to try to interpret the writing on the steamed up mirror. Of what she could make out of it, it said watching you to grow sis, or watching you to grow. Sis. She freaked out immediately and called my grandpa to come home quickly. She showed my grandpa the mirror and they both were freaking out. My mom wasn't sure if my grandpa believed her, but she was still freaking out nonetheless. Just a few months ago, in 2021, my dad was over at my house. My parents are separated, paying his monthly visit to me. Usually when I talk to my dad we speak about our paranormal encounters. My mom joined the conversation and told the story to me and my dad again. My dad mentioned something I said earlier about my basement being haunted. My mom, being a huge spiritual and paranormal believer, decided she was gonna perform a f-king exorcism in our basement. She dragged us down with her. We turned off the lights with the room only lit by a candle. We heard steps down the stairs but didn't peek past our closed eyes. Nothing happened other than that, but my mom said she felt the presence of a sisterly figure. Redditor 125, I'm super chill person, an art teacher and rock garden enthusiast lol. I love paranormal stuff but don't go looking for it or anything. I work with kids so I'm pretty substance free and of sound mind. The man who killed his 2 dogs and himself in my house is still here. The dogs too. A German Shepherd and a Malamute. So backstory, got the house cheap because of its history of a very gory previous owner suicide. He'd also attempted to murder somebody during his mental breakdown but I do not know the details. He was a nice person that had no mental health support and decided to kill his beloved dogs and himself. I thought how horrible, but man, I needed a place to live ASAP. So I braced myself against superstition or the creeps. The weirdness started immediately. Pounding and moaning like the house is being hit by a bulldozer. Neighbors can hear it from outside sometimes. Huge dogs howling from somewhere inside the house. Bedroom doors opening and closing. Footsteps through the kitchen hallway every night at 4 a.m. It is nerve-wracking but also sad. More than once I've awakened thinking my house is being broken into. Then I started seeing the dogs walking across my bedroom carpet and standing at the foot of my bed staring at me. Startling the heck out of me because I don't have a GSD or Malamute, I have a Sheltie with an overbite that can only make FFFFFFF noises. My own dog Kelly barks and went crazy fing at the ghost dogs, and I ran all over the house making sure it was really spirits. Kelly now sleeps under the covers with me. We see their fluffy tails and watch them disappear into the closet. I don't think he's a bad spirit, and the dogs are certainly innocent. Often things go missing and I'll ask him and the dogs to help, and the missing things reappear in totally odd locations. Like my lipstick showing up in the freezer, or my headphones under my dresser. Places I'd never leave anything lol. Redditor 126, tell that to Ryan Bergera and Shane Maddage. Redditor 127, me and my mate were stoned and looked in one of the rooms and the ceiling was covered in flies. No windows open, all gone the next morning. Redditor 128, more of sleep paralysis stories. But I have two and two more. When I was biking home at night, I was listening to heavy metal as one does, and I'm passing by a hospital. There are condos to the other side that I am near to when I hear very clearly, "Help!" And I mean clear as day. I stop, turn around, take off the earphones and call out. Nothing. I look around. I peek into cars around this area. I spend 15 minutes calling out before I leave and think it is just from the metal music. But I know of not a single song that has a random help. When my parents were renovating a room, my sister and I were going through old VHSs and one of them just was flung out of he3 hands and fully across the room. Me, that just flew out of your hands. Her, yeah it did. I was sleeping in said renovated room and I woke up. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink on my own. I could barely breathe. And then something crawled on top of me and I'm craning my eyes down to see this extremely old man with long gray and black hair. I hear "go to sleep" before it goes away and I'm left staring at my alarm clock for an hour. I prayed to every god I knew for my mom to check on me. She didn't. I was napping on the couch and half asleep when I see this black figure just sort of peek at me then vanish. I wake myself up and then go looking. The only one in the house is my older brother and he told me he hadn't come upstairs. Redditor 129, the night my husband died, it was well after 1 a.m, I went to bed, was crying and felt the bed shift on the other side, then something touched the back of my left shoulder. It was not a hand touching skin feeling and have no words to describe the sensation. I said that I couldn't handle it and the touch lifted and the bed shifted again. Freaky thing that I ever experienced. Redditor 130, used to get sleep paralysis so the time when I was like 8-13ish. A couple of times I felt as if my whole body was vibrating and then I'd feel like an arm or a leg would be raising or floating up even though my body was flat on the bed. Once I even had a full out of body experience but it only lasted a couple of seconds. Redditor 131, I felt a feeling after my dad flatlined. Died. I saw something, spriting or whatever it was, went through my right arm. Right before my cousin walked in. Redditor 132, I lived in a 3-story row house in the southern US 20 years ago. When I moved in, my roommate let me have the 3rd floor to myself, which was a cool setup with a bedroom, office, and walk-in closet. He had the tiny, 2nd floor bedroom. I thought it was odd that he didn't want the cool bedroom. I would occasionally feel like I was being watched but shrugged it off and had a good time living there. Still, it felt creepy in that room from time to time. I eventually moved out to take a job in a different city. When I moved out, I packed all my stuff into the U-Haul the night before and slept on the LR couch. When I got up the next morning, above the TV, about a foot from the ceiling, I heard the kindly voice of an old lady say bye. It was unmistakably an old lady's voice. To make sure I wasn't hearing the voice from somewhere else outside the apartment, I peeked my head outside. It was a cold, rainy October day and the only person anywhere near the apartment was a young Hispanic woman walking her baby in a carriage. It couldn't have been the neighbors. The neighbors on the opposite side where the voice came from didn't speak English. The neighbors on the side where it did come from were a woman in her 30s living with her old dad. I knew her voice because I could always hear her through the walls yelling at her dad. I knew her voice and it wasn't her. Plus, it very much came from inside the apartment. About a month later, I called the girl I was dating in that city and asked her if she ever noticed anything strange about the apartment without telling her why. She told me that when she was there alone, she would hear footsteps coming from the 3rd floor and would never go up there when I wasn't there. I called my ex-roommate and he admitted that he was freaked out by the 3rd floor and that was why he was happy with having the tiny bedroom on the 2nd floor. Redditor 133, I've posted this on another thread. Just copying and pasting. 6 years ago, my friends and I decided to make a stupidly unplanned trip to LA and were forced to stay at a shady motel in Bellflower, as our last resort. A ghost materialized in the room as both my friends fell asleep. The ghost was dressed from the 70s, had long hair, but didn't have a face. Only two glowing yellow eyes. The ghost ran into the bathroom, and as I went to check, he was gone, but our soap and towels were on the ground. The bathroom had no window or any other way he could have physically escaped. This was one of the scariest things I've experienced in my life up to this point. Redditor 134. When I was around 13-14, my brother and I would always play with my mom's yoga ball like it was a massive soccer ball. One day we were playing kickball with it in our basement, and the ball was kicked onto a wall and bounced perfectly into an unoccupied bedroom we had down there. The ball stopped perfectly in the middle and rolled back. We both looked at each other and ran upstairs without question. We would have multiple instances like this. Redditor 135. Not my story personally. My mom had a friend whose son claimed a nice man sat on the end of his bed at night and spoke to him sometimes. She thought nothing of it, though he kept claiming it was happening. Sometime later, the mom of the boy was showing him a photo album. Whilst flicking through, he pointed at a man and said, "Mummy, that's the man that comes to visit me sometimes." The man in the photo was a great-granddad he'd never met or seen before and had died before he was born. Redditor 136. I have always believed in ghosts. The time I got freaked out was when I had my daughter. She had toys that would make noises and speak. One was a Peppa Pig book where you push the character's picture and the book would say something. One night it started to go off randomly and say, "I'm here." I thought it was the batteries dying and straight up took out the battery so it would stop. Then, another toy started to randomly go off at night. It was a remote control and it would speak the numbers being pressed. This toy kept on saying 9, which in German means no. My family was from the old Soviet Union and knew how to speak German. So I assumed it was my grandfather telling me not to do something. Redditor 137. There's been a handful of times that I can't recall at a moment's notice, but one always sticks out to me. I was about 12 and went with my mom to some lady's house. I'm not sure why we were there. Maybe mom was looking to teach that person's child piano, or looking for a caregiver for me so I had somewhere safe to go after school. I was nearby in the same room and spotted something moving, looked like a cat out of the corner of my eye. I turned and saw what should have been some sort of tabby cat disappearing under a small end table. I just saw the tail and back end. I got closer and got on my hands and knees to see where this cat went and get a feel for if it likes to be pet at all. But when I look down, there's no cat. No biggie, right? Cats are fast and my response time may have been slow, and I was still wearing glasses at that time, so I might have missed this cat just moving steadily under Funreicher. I went to the owner of the house and waited for a pause between her conversation to my mom, and asked about her cat. She doesn't have a cat, and this was not an area where animals or neighbors' pets just wandered indoors when they pleased, so it left me wondering. Redditor 138. I grew up in a house with a lot of paranormal activity. My parents thought it was just the house settling for a while, but noticed that things were getting really weird. It started out with very small things, such as my dad's wallet disappearing and then dropping from behind his computer a week later, or a dime being flung across the room to hit my mom in the face, or my shoes being in places we never put them. Sometimes I would point at the ceiling corner and ask, "Who's that?" Mind that I was very little, about 2-3 years old when I said those things. My parents saw nobody there. It progressively got more and more unsettling over the course of a few months. A plate would fall from the middle of the table to the floor without breaking, and there was even a giant bang sound on the top of our roof in the middle of the night, which the neighbors heard and came outside to see if we were okay. The gate to our backyard was open, and we had it latched shut before. In the morning, we decided to check the roof, but nothing was there, no damage was dealt. We still have no explanation for it. That's about the extent of my paranormal experience, but my sister might have a few that I didn't think about. Redditor 139. I was driving home from somewhere about a month ago and I was passing a cemetery. I had to look back to see what my kid wanted, and when I looked back to the road there was a man standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, turned around to check on the kids, and then looked out to where the man was. He was gone. Nowhere to hide or vanish to. I could only assume it was a ghost from the cemetery wanting to duck with someone. Lol. Redditor 140. Don't know if it counts as a story, but here goes. I often hear footsteps when I'm home alone. The kettle sometimes goes on its own. The fridge occasionally opens and closes on its own, too. Objects will fall off shelves every now and then, without prompting. I often hear noises from around the house, but nobody else can hear them. Redditor 141, not me but my grandpa and grandma were convinced their late neighbor moved into their house with them. There are plenty of stories, but the most memorable was one morning my grandpa retired went to the garage to start my grandma's car. When we walked in saw a perfect line of nails sitting on their head pointy side up along the garage door where my grandma would have driven. They locked their house and garage up tight at night so they don't believe it was anyone other than their ghost neighbor. When they moved a few states away they invited him to come. Redditor 142, I once heard a UFO in Yosemite. We were on a hike about 13 miles away from the nearest road. But out of nowhere we hear a whoosh that sounded like a car going 100 miles an hour not too far away. And it couldn't have been a plane either because the sky was clear and would have been too far up for it to sound so near. Redditor 143, I have a list of things that have happened to me, and they're all kinda small compared to everyone else's, so I'll just list them off. 1. I was trying to sleep and my blanket got ripped off of me. My door creaked so I would have known if someone entered my room. So scared shitless I looked around to see if my cat got locked in my room. I looked everywhere but he wasn't there. Also, when I say that my blanket was ripped off, I mean it was literally torn off of me. I was wrapped up in it. 2. I've been hearing giggling in my hallways, and it isn't my sister's because it's too high-pitched. 3. I got this app that apparently sees ghosts. I doubted it but tried it. I found a ghost hanging in my closet, one in the hallway and one in my kitchen. I've done research but nothing came up about any suspicious deaths or suicides. That's all, not very interesting but it's here. Redditor 144, no idea if this was paranormal or not, but one night I was sitting downstairs on my couch when I heard the front doorknob rattling. My mom was out of the house and so was my brother, so I assumed it was one of them trying to use their key to get in. Then the doorknob stopped rattling, but no one ever came in. Creeped out, I went upstairs and told my family about it when everyone got home. Till this day I still wonder what that was, whether a person or a ghost. Redditor 145, when I was 6, my parents sent me to my great-grandmother for a few days in the summer. She lived in a small village in Russia. I explicitly remember this. One day after helping building a shed, at night when we went to bed, I was sleeping on a warm brick stove, the kind that had a section built on top of it to serve as a bed. I woke up in the middle of the night from a sound of, as if someone was walking on horse hooves on a wooden floor. In the corner of the house, kind of parallel to my bed, there was a string stretched and attached to the walls with laundry and a large white bed sheet was hanging on it. Behind, there was a chair with a light source. When I opened my eyes after hearing that sound, I saw a figure behind the sheet standing. The bottom part of the body was goat legs, a little hairy with hooves, and upper body of a human. I remember my heartbeat was beating so fast that I covered myself with the blanket, terrified. After calming down, I peeked again and that thing was gone. I was petrified. To this day, it is still a mystery and I occasionally think about it. Redditor 146, so my uncle purchased a home to rebuild for his family about 25 years ago. When they tore down the existing home prior to building his future home, they had found the remains of a little girl's body under the built-in shed in the backyard. Due to that, there were a lot of investigations with the police which made a huge delay in the building process of the house. Turned out that the previous owner's father murdered his daughter. Fast forward to once the house is built and ready for my uncle and his family to live in, he had 3 younger daughters at that time. They would experience some weird ass shit in that house, including myself. Once, my cousin would tell me how she would see a little girl with pigtails walking around her room at night while sleeping. Another story, my cousin was home alone with her oldest sister when all of a sudden they would hear a bunch of people running down the stairs when there was no one at home. That same night their mother's hairdryer was going off, and when they went into her parents' bedroom the hairdryer was turned off and it was not plugged into the wall. There were so many crazy stories that happened in that house, but I'll never forget how one day my uncle was throwing a pool party at the house and I decided to go play with my cousin's cat that was in her room. I was about 8-9 years old and I remember having the door open a tad bit, and out of nowhere the door slammed and locked itself. I remember being so scared that I screamed for my life and felt paralyzed, like I couldn't move from where I was standing. Eventually my mom came to get me and she had to unlock the door from the outside of the room. It was really weird, but I will never forget how scared I was. Redditor 147, it was an alright film, great use of the found footage format, 4 stars out of 5. Redditor 148, not sure if this is really paranormal or I was hallucinating. When I was 7 years old, my mother's friend came over, we'll call him Luke, not real name. But anyways, he decided to lock me in my bedroom at 8 p.m. He sat at the door and I couldn't get out. I was screaming and crying. After I gave up trying to escape, knowing Luke wouldn't let me out, I turned around and looked at my dresser. I thought I saw the fucking devil. Here's a description of what I saw: a skinny short thing with red skin, horns. I was terrified, so I started screaming. After 2 minutes it disappeared. I don't see it anymore. Then I sat on my bed and I felt something sit on my bed. It started scratching my back. It left marks. I don't have images, sadly. Side note, I live in an apartment on the edge of my town in a very sketchy neighborhood. It truly was hauntingly traumatized. Redditor 149, when I was a senior in high school, a group of friends and I decided to celebrate the first day of October by doing the spookiest thing we could think of, using a Ouija board in a cemetery. We drove to the local cemetery, which sits right outside a small town of about 200 people, and found a nice spot to sit. We lit our candles, circled up, and began to communicate. We ended up contacting a spirit that claimed to be a little girl who had been killed by her father in a terrible accident. She said she was scared because she wasn't supposed to be talking to us, and that he was going to come after her. We all played along, but we had our doubts and thought someone in the group was probably just messing with us. Then things got weird. The little girl got scared. Like, really scared. She was giving her messages more frantically, and began talking in an almost hostile manner, saying she didn't like some of us. As this is going on, the wooden door of the shed that sat in the northern end of the cemetery suddenly opened and slammed shut. It wasn't a windy night at all, and we had been out there for nearly an hour at this point, and that hadn't happened at all prior to this. We asked her if she slammed the door, to which she replied yes. We didn't believe her, so we asked her to do it again. On cue, the door started opening and slamming rapidly. We all sat in horrified wonder watching this happen. Once we came to our senses, we said goodbye to the spirit and booked it out of the cemetery. That was the last time I used a Ouija board. Redditor 150, when I was about 8 years old, there was a large tornado that touched down about 50 yards from my house. We lived in an old farmhouse that had a basement, so the whole family, my mom and 2 siblings minus my dad who was watching the storm, went to the basement. We are all a little scared because the power is out, it's noisy as hell, and we know it's a big one. So, I try and calm down, and sit in a couch we have there away from everyone else. Out of nowhere I feel someone grab my wrist while I had it in the armrest. I jerk it away and run back to my family at the bottom of the steps. My grandmother, who used to live in our house before we bought it from them, died just 6 months before the storm. When I finally got the nerve to tell everyone about it, they were convinced it was my grandma telling me it would be okay. The storm passed by, took out about 3 acres worth of pine trees right next to the house, but nobody's house was majorly damaged.